research show. Colleagues of ours named Joe Phelan and Bruce Link did a study looking at the degree to which the general population believes people with mental illness are dangerous, that we're unpredictable, and therefore we shouldn't hire us. If anybody in the audience doubts whether that's true, I'd be glad to share the numbers with you later. But the facts are is that the population grossly overestimates the degree to which people like me with mental illness are dangerous. And so they were hoping, comparing the figures in 1956 to 1996, that given how well educated we are with things, you see it cut in half. Actually, what they found is the reverse. Is over that period of time, when the stigma of mental illness in the United States got twice as bad. And by the way, there are meta-analyses. I did one with a German psychiatrist named Georg Samaras that shows it's the same thing around the Western world. That's 1996. That's a little old. They repeated it in 2006. It's still just as bad. And so what is stigma? I am an academic, and so my goal as an academic is to reduce all the complexities of the world down to a single matrix. This is it. The way I understand stigma is the way social psychologists do in terms of structure, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So let me talk to you about a group in the United States I know a lot about that has stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. The stereotypes about Irish is that we're all drunks and we beat our wives. In the United States, if I asked how many people here know that all Irish are drunks, you would all raise your hands. Do you Brits must share that too, right? Every Brit, you all know Irish are drunks? Are you being political correct? Pardon me?
Thieves and terrorists.
Thieves and terrorists. Well, that's left over from the IRA stages. The reality is you cannot live in a culture and not learn the stereotypes. You know stereotypes, again, in the United States. I know stereotypes about blacks and gays and Latinos and women. Prejudice is agreeing with the stereotype. That's right, they're all drunks and having an emotional reaction, and I loathe them, and discrimination is a behavior. And so I'm not going to hire them or rent to them or provide good services to them. Similarly, we're going to say what the stereotypes are about mental illness. The big one, clearly, is that people with mental illness are dangerous. But similarly, that they're weak, that they choose to have this sort of problem. Prejudice is agreeing with it and therefore being afraid of people with mental illness. And discrimination is a behavior. And I'm not going to hire somebody if I know they're going to snap, right? And so this translates into different types. Public stigma is what the public does to people with mental illness. It affects our employment, our housing, our health care, our educational opportunities. I'd like to share this study with you. It's done by a colleague of ours named Ben Druss. He looked at about 45,000 admissions to the veterans healthcare system in the United States. These are people who presented with rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, flushing, which suggests the primary care doctor should send them to a cardiologist for what he called a PTCA. I don't know what that is, but it translates to the doctor needed to send them to a cardiologist. And 100% of the time when the doctor thought the veteran was just a regular guy, he got referred. I say he because at the time this was done, the VA system was largely male. If the doctor knew the veteran had substance abuse problem, it went down to 80% of the time. If the doctor knew the person had a mental illness problem, either from their chart or from the way they presented, it went down to 40% of the times. Two take-home issues. One is stigma is no longer this abstraction of people treating you badly. This is an issue of life and death. And two, this is physicians doing this. This is not uneducated people. Self-stigma is what people do to themselves. Some people who are in a group, some people with mental illness actually agree with the stereotypes. I have a mental illness and therefore I must be weak. I'm thinking the irony is it's hard enough dealing with my anxiety and depression, and on top of that, I have to deal with all this social shame. It leads to lower self-esteem, I'm not worthy, lower self-efficacy, I'm not able, and it's what we've called the why try effect. I mean, why should I try to get a job? Somebody like me is not worthy of it. Or why should I try to live on my own? Somebody like me is not able. And label avoidance, finally, the stigma of race is largely skin color. And the stigma of gender is body type. I cannot look around this room and tell you, for example, who's gay or straight. That's hidden. In fact, the gay-straight analogy with mental illnesses I'll come back to a lot because I think there's a lot to be learned from that. In case there's any doubt, because we have written about this, I am not saying that gays belong in the DSM or are mentally ill. I'm saying the lessons from the gay community have a lot to be The mental health community has a lot to learn from them. And similarly, I cannot go around the room and look and find out and guess who has a mental health problem and who does not. And so the label is the fundamental thing. If I see you coming out of Peter Burns' psych office, I know you must be nuts because you went in to see a psychiatrist. And so people avoid the label. And so in the United States, there's pretty clear evidence that about 45% of people with serious mental illness will never go out and seek help. And of those who do go seek help, this is Canadian data, about a quarter of those will drop out early. Actually, that's a very conservative estimate. People drop out of treatment as a rule. And then one of the reasons they're doing it is they just don't want to be known as a mental health person. You know, erasing stigma is not enough. I mean, getting rid of racism is not enough in our culture. Actually, a president of ours, Lyndon Johnson, put this nicely in 1965 after he passed the Civil Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson spoke at what in the United States is called a historically black college. In this case, it's Howard University, which is in D.C., and he said in his commencement speech, he said, "You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying, now you're free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders you please. We don't get rid of the effects of stigma just by waving our hands, that you know you're successful if you see it replaced with the idea of affirming attitudes and affirming actions. In the mental health world, we know that stigma is being squashed when it's being replaced by the idea that people with mental illness do recover, that recovery is a very complex idea, but even if you were given what I learned in school as a kiss of death diagnosis, schizophrenia, you still can recover. You definitely should have hope. Goals are in your language. And similarly, as you pursue that, you should have full right to self-determination in terms of what goals you seek out. Beliefs, though, are never enough. You need to have actions too. Amongst other things, we know that the stigma is going away when you see more what the American with Disabilities Act would call reasonable accommodations. You would see changes in the workplace so people with serious mental illness can accomplish their work goals without necessarily having to jump through odious hoops. And you see it when the community is supporting full citizenship among its members. And so how do we fix stigma? Well, let me just talk about one example of what I really think is an approach that doesn't work too well. Changing public stigma, we've also reduced to a single matrix. See, it's really interesting being an academic. You put everything on your business card in one fell swoop. We really think that different ways of changing public stigma can be broken down to protest, education, and contact. And what I want to do is talk about education, because as Westerners, we believe you can educate everything away. That all you got to do is teach people the facts about something and the stigma will go away. One example in the United States is DARE. DARE was at one time, it was in 75% of U.S. school districts. My kids went through it. Traditionally, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they learned about the dangers of drug use and drug paraphernalia with the idea of trying to decrease people in using illicit drugs or misusing alcohol. And this is one of the rare times the United States spent a lot of money on something and actually studied it. This is a research. Let me sum it up to you. 5 studies showed DARE had no effects. One study showed that people randomized to DARE are significantly different than people in the control group. Kids randomized to DARE were more likely to use drugs and alcohol to follow up. So although it seemed to be good intentions, it didn't work very well. Or another one I've become really interested recently is, you know, I imagine the EU has the same problem we do. There's this belief in the United States that vaccinations causes autism. And so it's a big public health agenda to try to change the notions of that. And you'll do it by putting out fact sheets about vaccines, or you'll do it by putting out these really moving videos showing a kid who wasn't vaccinated and how sick they got when they got mumps and measles. And the idea is you need to go out and get vaccinated and change your you need to be more willing to get vaccinated or to vaccinate your kids. They've done research on this that has absolutely no effect on attitudes, showing those fact sheets or showing those moving videos. It does have an effect on the degree to which a mother or a father would intend to vaccinate their kids. They're less likely to want to vaccinate their kids as a result. Part of it is this whole thing of being distrustful of education programs. Part of it is by the time we get to be adults, whether it's true or not, by the time we get to be adults, we figure we know it all. And so if you're showing me contrary information, it just tends to roll off of me, which is why Donald Trump has about 48% of my fellow citizens supporting him right now. We've done the same thing in the mental health side. In 1990, the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health launched the Decade of the Brain. We started showing these PET scans of brains all lit up, with the idea being if you went out and taught everybody that schizophrenia or bipolar disorder was a brain disorder, you would decrease the rate to which you would blame them. So if you saw that my head lights up, particularly in a PET scan, you're less likely to think I'm at fault for getting it. And research, including research we've done, shows that. So the public's less likely to blame me for it. The public's also less likely to believe I'm going to get better. And it's recovery is the degree to which an employer is going to hire me, or a landlord is going to rent to me, or healthcare providers provide the same health. It's hardwired in, right? I mean, look at that. Those are little light bulbs lighting up in there. There's no way you're going to get rid of that. And so that kind of approach, people pretty consistently agrees, not only does not work, but probably makes stigma worse. And so what do we think does work? Well, contact, I think, is probably the one approach. When we do contact, and we've actually done a slew of studies on the effect of contact. Contact is the way the social psychologists say, meet people. When you meet people with lived experience, research suggests it has a big effect. This is Bob Lundeen, who's somebody I worked with for about 10 years at the University of Chicago. Bob and I feel like we're sort of spiritually linked. We were born and we graduated from grade school, high school, and college all within a month of each other. At the end of college, he started his career in schizoaffective disorder, and I with anxiety and depression. He ended up being hospitalized more than a dozen times because he has bipolar disorder. He ends up getting in trouble with the law. He has substance use problems. And so he tends to tell his story. His story is one of, hi, I'm Bob, that these are the challenges I've had, but these are the successes I've had. And so we, Nicholas and I, did a meta-analysis that came out in 2012. For those of you who don't know meta-analyses, meta-analysis is a statistical procedure. The problem with research is this group does a study and you publish it in a journal, it goes on a shelf, and this one goes on a shelf, and this one goes on a shelf, and how do you make sense of it? It's a computer program, it takes all that stuff and squashes it into one final. And so we were interested in what exactly is the effect of contact, meet Bob Lundeen, or hear Pat's story, or education, hear an expert talk about the myths versus the facts of mental illness. And we looked at the overall effects, the effects on attitudes, and the effect on behaviors. Found 79 studies, represent 38,000 subjects. There were actually 13 randomized controlled trials, which in research is sort of the platinum of good research. And this is what we found. To put it in perspective, these are effect sizes. This is how much bang for the buck you got. And when red is the bang for the buck for contact, blue is the bang for the buck for education. And you can see in each case, overall, attitudes, behaviors, the effects are 2 to 3 times. That's immediate. So that's do it and then see what kind of change it has. For follow-up, we just published a study that came out last year, I think. For follow-up, pretty much you find any benefit from education goes away. Benefit for contact maintains over time.